So, gentlemen, last question, then I'm going to open it up to the audience. How could income share agreements really fit into the broader landscape of higher education financing?
I would say,
I'll let both of you take that.
Sure. I would say federal direct loans are great. I think there are problems with the income contingent plans. As you don't pay down your loan, all the interest is capitalized. You owe a tax bill at the end. I mean, there are problems with it, but our position is really that this is a safe form of financing for higher education. We see these, especially in the short and medium term, as serving two functions, one of which you just mentioned. The first is for programs that are not eligible for federal funding or federal loans. There are a lot of new programs every day, and this has the added benefit of making sure that we don't have another sort of for-profit college debacle where programs are paid out of whether they, in fact, get students jobs. So a lot of the partners that we're talking to are in workforce development, jobs training, and in coding academies. The other half is, Parent Plus and private loans. They both have cosigners. They're a huge burden on families. ISAs are not a silver bullet, but we see them as a very powerful alternative to those two sources of funding for traditional higher ed institutions. So, I mean, those are really the two areas I see ISAs developing. Our goal is really to sort of build as many pilots as possible to see what niches it can fill and what solutions it can generate.
So, first of all, I wish we lived in a world where ISAs and significant amounts of debt weren't necessary. And this week in Inside Higher Education, I authored an essay where I threw my hat on the free college bandwagon. And because I really do believe that our economy demands a much higher level of training and education for our citizens if our economy is going to continue to grow. And I do think that to some extent the President Hoyne's essay last week in the Washington Post was right on point in that regard. He said, we don't know what's coming when artificial intelligence impacts our economy. We understand what happened with robotics, right? We've all adjusted to the impact of robotics, but when we combine robotics with artificial intelligence, what kind of jobs go away? The primary job of men in the United States today is, I did not know this till Tuesday night, so don't feel bad, is still drivers, truck drivers, bus drivers, taxi cab drivers, Uber drivers. Primary job of adult men in the United States is drivers. One of the principal employers of women in the United States is banking. What two jobs are going to get really impacted by technology, particularly artificial intelligence? Well, those are two. I have a nephew who is a radiologist, graduated from medical school 4 years ago, just finished his residency. And the application of technology to read films is going to make radiologists who do diagnostics out of business, because the technology is going to be able to do that more accurately than human beings can at some point in the near future. So those kinds of impacts on our economy mean that our citizens are going to need more and more education in order to have jobs that where they can't be made redundant by technology. And so I honestly believe that's the first thing. So I'd like ISAs to go away, principally because people don't need the debt, right? And I think Mike would agree with me on that. So, but if we're going to do it, I think it really needs to be done in ways that allow us to evaluate and test particular burning questions. And I think, Mitch Daniels, who's the president of Purdue, has taken that kind of view when he has set up this pilot. And I do think that some of the areas where that Mike was describing, short-term training programs. I don't personally want to see federal direct loan program funds going to programs that are 6 or 12 months in length. I actually told somebody at the White House actually didn't tell them. They said, we think you should make federal student loans available for really short-term programs. And I took out my credit card and said, that's where that's for. It was kind of mean. I admit it. It was kind of mean. I've gotten nicer in my old age. Have you noticed how much calmer I am? But I do think that exploring, using ISAs to fill some of those particular gaps, I think is really important, because then we'll know better whether those kind of investments are the right thing for our citizens and for the institutions and for the system overall, and then you decide whether they should be absorbed into the federal programs or not. But I think it is to fill gaps and niches, and it's not a silver bullet. The silver bullet is to deal with the price that we're charging students, and that falls back to states reinvesting and the federal government supporting that reinvestment.
So we're going to open it up to audience questions. You get first dibs. Go ahead.
Yeah.
One thing that I guess I'm trying to kind of work through the theoretical underpinnings of that, it seems like it would just be more direct to literally say how much, if the goal is to have everyone paying the same dollar amount, why not just say that dollar amount? I mean, in my mind, the
Sure.
point of ISAs would be for it to be a percentage. But if the goal is to have everyone pay the same dollar amount, it seems like it would just be more direct for everyone to pay a dollar amount.
Right. So thank you for the question. The first thing I'd say is they're not interest rates; they're rates of income. I have a tick now in saying that. But your question about sort of dollar amounts is actually. Could you repeat it quickly? I'm sorry, I lost it there.
2.5% is bad.
Sorry,
Yeah.
there we go. Sorry, I misspoke before. So I guess the question is, in my mind, the purpose of ISAs is to repay a percentage of your income.
Right.
But if the goal of the differentiation
Right.
of the rates is based on your major, and the goal is to have everyone pay the same dollar amount
Right.
based on those rates, why not just actually name
see.
the dollar amount?
Got it. So the first thing is that they do say the dollar amount. So there's a tool, if you go to the Purdue website, it shows you, based on different levels of income and your income share, what you would pay in monthly and yearly payments. That's, when I say the goal is to pay the same dollar amount, that's if all of our modeling predictions are correct about what people are going to make. So if we predict that English major makes $42,367 and we predict a finance majors make X, they are going to be paying the same dollar amounts based on the income rate that we ascribe to them. But that English major may make 30 or may make 100 or may make 10 or nothing. And so the goal was just to equalize the cost of capital to every student. And that was the pricing scheme at Purdue.
It just has this weird appearance, which is that as I said, you're paying more for an inferior product. And that just drives me crazy, personally.
Any other questions?
Thank you. So I'm one of the founders of another startup that's trying to make these models and implement them with universities. And one thing that I haven't heard either of you talk about is utility. And I know that the Purdue model actually looks at where you pay more than you would with a loan, but just for a shorter period. What is your view on the fact that students get more utility out of their money by basically backloading the payments, due to which early on in their career they have more money left to buy a house? Because like 3/4 of the drop in housing purchases are because of students with student loans. They have the money to start a family or to choose a career that they're passionate about. Like how do you see those elements as an important or maybe not important factor for ISAs? Are you familiar with utility, the economic concept?
Do you mean decreasing marginal utility of further income? Is that?
Sorry?
I couldn't hear. Did you say?
Are you familiar with the concept of utility? Basically, that
Concept of utility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So can you guys explain that for the rest of the audience, just in case?
Sorry.
I gotcha.
I was a philosophy major, so I should be able to give a crisp definition of
Okay.
utility. I think if I understand your point correctly, I think the point is that really we talk about incomes and cash burdens, but really people have a lot of different desires in their career and their financing, and different kinds of payments are going to have different impacts on different people. One of the things that, I didn't hear your question precisely, but one of the things that attracts me to ISAs is that, and this is really sort of a second degree discussion, so this is not something that's really currently being piloted, but different careers have different risk shapes and different income curves. So a journalist has an income. You can tell me what it is.
No.
Sorry,
don't make it feel bad.
Has a much more volatile and variable income curve than an engineer, and that implies a greater need for risk protection. And so someone like that may be happy to pay for a very long time, like 20 years, but a very low percentage of income because they can know that it'll never be a burden on them. Someone who is going to be an engineer and knows that they are very quickly going to earn $72,000 for the rest of their career with a 3% increase every year or 5% increase every year, they want to get it over with. They don't really need a whole lot of risk protection except in the beginning of their career when they're looking for a job. They may want to take a year off. They may want to take care of their kid for a year. So they're going to be what's attractive about ISAs from that sort of conceptual standpoint is that they're really ways of building different risk mitigating financial tools out of the ISA concept. And I think that's powerful. I think that's something that we can't currently do. If you were to say, you're never going to have to worry about it, it's 2% for the next 30 years, I would take that deal. Who cares about 2%? I get to keep 98% of my earned income, fine. So that flexibility in concept is a strength, I think, of the concept. And that's totally in the abstract, and these haven't been piloted. And I would say that my constant refrain is we want to build pilots, we want to see how these actually behave in the world. It could just be that the simple difference between right now and Yale is that email is a much more effective tracking method. And that's it. And that could be the difference between a successful and an unsuccessful program. So I'm hesitant to speculate. That's a conceptual feature I find very attractive.
Well, and I do think that this notion that we've developed more recently in the federal direct loan program, where you have some people who have borrowed under the program are repaying it through an income-based repayment plan, and they're going to get their loans forgiven after 10 years because they're in a public service occupation, or they're working for a nonprofit employer, or meet some particular test, and then everybody else is going to be forgiven, twice the length. That's going to be an interesting, give us an interesting insight, I think, into the way that at least people at this particular point in history are viewing career, are viewing what the importance is of choices they make, life choices they make. I know, Center for American Progress is a 501c3, and so I do not have any student loans, but many of my younger colleagues do, and they're making choices about whether they're going to continue to work for 501c3, influenced by the fact that after 10 years they'll have their loans forgiven. That might lead them to make different career choices and other kinds of life choices over their longer career as well. And so it's going to be a fascinating thing to examine. I will say, I suspect that the Department of Education is not thinking about that at all. They're just an implementer. They're not thinking about how to evaluate things like that. But I do think it's going to be a really interesting social experiment that we've undertaken. I will say that my overall perspective on student loan debt is that this is a social experiment we decided a game we decided to play on a particular generation in ways that no one ever contemplated, to our peril. But
I can say as a general matter, just to close the thought, I mean, especially as the labor market in general and some of the developments that you described, David, it's advantageous to have a flexible financing instrument. I mean, on the one hand, yes, sort of the rates on English majors are higher at Purdue. On the other hand, these are the careers that are currently high, as you said, there's a learning curve in the job market, et cetera, and having some protection that, if you go off to Europe for 6 months, or if you go and take another course, or the interest on your loans is not being capitalized, and you have some degree of flexibility. That's at a macro level and at an individual level. It's one of the things that originally drew me to the concept.
Two things, though, I want to just mention in response to something you just said. I think even with the interest capitalization rules in the direct loan program, you would be hard pressed to get to 2.5% as a multiplier.
Oh, 2.5 times.
Yeah, 2.5 times. I think you would be very hard pressed to model it out to get to that. So to some extent that worries me. The other thing I meant to mention earlier, because it has bearing on this loan forgiveness thing, for public service. Public service loan forgiveness is not taxable income. Right. So we do. That's something we can say definitively. What we cannot say definitively is the other forgiveness after 20 years of repayment is taxable income. We can't say that. The IRS has never formally and won't formally rule on that until next year, because they'll rule on income contingent repayment. The original income contingent repayments, when people have gotten those forgiveness, the first of those will happen in 2016. Therefore, we'll know it next year maybe. But I do think that there are some of those unknowns in the world that will impact behavior in the future once they're known, right?
Any other questions?
Good afternoon. Do you see an opportunity perhaps to combine the idea of income share agreements as maybe sort of a disruptive technology with pre-existing ways to plan and save for college? And by that I mean, is it feasible to suggest that you could introduce the concept of ISAs at the same time of introducing families to like 529 plans and saving, so that it's not something that you introduce so late into the process for a junior or senior, and that you introduce this concept earlier? Because maybe some of the criticisms with ISAs are, people think it's the equivalent of a regressive tax, like the lottery. People without means are spending money on the lottery, but all money's going to schools and they're receiving the benefit, but not particularly. And it might, provide for a greater shine on ISAs if they do that. And I guess the other part of the question is, what happens when the disruptor gets disrupted? So, for example, ISAs right now is the disruptor, but let's say somebody comes along and says, well, we hold the private sector more accountable for the future education of our workforce. So rather than make the student be the recipient of the ISA, why don't we make the private sector have a greater stake in the education of their potential employees, and sort of figure out a way to make it like, if the employers have to invest a certain amount in training, well, is there a way to put them on the hook for the money that's invested in their future workers?
So certainly you can envision models where either through ISA innovation or through innovations in the direct loan program, where you could think about getting employers more engaged in the process of repaying student loans. And there's another session going on, I think right now, where there's some discussion of those ideas. But my personal opinion is that we should principally collect federal direct loans through the IRS wage withholding system. That's my position. Right. If we did that, we could create mechanisms and incentives for employers to do loan forgiveness for employees that they want to hire or retain, because they would know about the student loan debt and they could come along and say, you know, we're concerned because you're an engineer, you might leave us. So rather than taking and collecting the 10% of your income and sending it to the education department, we're going to take 5% out of your check and we're going to contribute 5% of our money into your student loans, or pay it all, right? And so there are ways in which moving to that system would allow for a significant innovation in the way that employers view that. I would say similarly, you could do something at the state level where, you know, Maine has a need for teachers, and so, you know, and other kinds of employees because of the rural nature of the state, they might be well served to come along and use the tax system, the state income tax system, and its interaction with the direct loan program to incentivize that. So I think there's a lot of room for innovation around that. I think that getting information out early on ISAs or about like repayment options and direct loans is hard because they're not static. I've left the department 5 years ago, and the department's changed its income-based repayment plan since I left. And before that, we had just changed it, and before that, it had been changed like 3 years before. So it's not like you can describe to a eighth grader what the system's going to look like, and we have to get to a place where we can do that. We have to get to a place where people are making these huge financial decisions in a very vulnerable period of time, when their sons or daughters are about to graduate from high school. I had this experience 6 years ago. It was a highly stressful and emotional period of time for all three of us. And we knew a lot more than like the average person. My wife helped run the federal TRIO programs, which help low-income first-generation students prepare for and succeed in college. And I did what I did, so we knew way too much. And it was highly stressful and very emotional. And so we got to get to a place where this information flow is a lot better, a lot more robust, but it also needs to recognize that there's so much of this stuff that's changing around that conversation that makes it really hard to do, and which cries out for some real reforms. I'll plug myself. The Center for American Progress issued three really significant reports that had part of the title College for All, and that deals with, and that sounds familiar, that Bernie Sanders stole our name, not our proposal. It's very critical you understand that. The second is we did do a report and had a proposal called Great Recession, Great Retreat. And in Great Recession, Great Retreat, we talked for greater public investment in higher education. Those two things have to be read together, in my estimate, to understand what I was thinking at the time. But it really is, we need to reinvest. We need to reinvest significantly. We need to, give people information when they're in eighth grade and repay through the tax system. So.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question, then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, actually, it's easier without it, actually.
It's much easier without it.
Yeah.
There's an echo.
Oh, is there?
When there's a microphone,
It's
hard to hear.
it echoes back at us and we can't.
Okay.
They may not be able to hear you, but we'll be able to hear you better.
Well, just repeat my question back. So, listening to all this, I'm wondering, and this question is for both of you, if there is any value in considering the ISA model for the gainful employment programs, where the school would actually be the receiver. So, the whole idea, the challenge we've had with the gainful employment programs is return on investment, that the cost is more than they can't afford to pay their debt.
Right.
So if the schools were encouraged or strong-armed into discounting the tuition that the student had to pay out of pocket for an ISA type arrangement, do you think there might be any value in sort of ensuring that the ROI existed in those programs?
I mean, I don't know enough about those programs in particular to speak expertly about them. I mean, I can say in general, there's been sort of the traditional misconception of ISAs is that the goal is to maximize income. Really what's interesting about them is keeping future NPV of income above the cost of the program. And they, depending on who the capital holder is, they're highly incentivized to do that because otherwise they lose money. So, I mean, in general, that's one of the things that attracts me to the idea. So I'm not sufficiently familiar with those programs to say exactly what it would be, but David.
Yeah, I mean, so gainful employment programs are a construction of the Congress. Congress said that programs at for-profit institutions and non-degree programs at nonprofits and publics have to lead to gainful employment and recognized occupation. For a long time, gainful employment was a check the box on the form that one submitted. If one was an institution and wanted the programs to be eligible, you just checked the box and said they were gainful employment, led to gainful employment, and the department said, okay, we'll accept that. We, in the Obama administration, had another view. We believed one could define the term. And we defined the term through borrowers being able to repay their loans and having a positive return on investment for the debt that people took on. But it was specific to debt. So could you construct a mechanism by which institutions get paid based on how well their students succeed? So in other countries, there are models where the institutions are compensated based on the success of their students in graduating. I don't know of any that go so far as to say it's based on what the earnings of those graduates are. I don't think anybody goes that far. In yet another paper I wrote at the Center for American Progress, though, I did propose a little twist on the idea, and that essentially was, why not require institutions to buy a share of the bonds used to finance their direct loans? And then they get return on those bonds based on the, what the Treasury bill is that would otherwise have been used to support those loans. But if the institution's students outperform our expectations, they would get a bonus above that rate, and if the students at that institute, the graduates of that institution, underperform, they would take a haircut. And because the way in which we finance student loans is by selling bonds, and my other part of this was, you could set it as, you have to buy your cohort default rates share of the bond. So if your cohort default rate's 25%, you got to buy 25% of whatever the loan volume is, and if it's 2%, you buy 2%. Between those two mechanisms, you might move the needle a little bit in terms of both the pricing of the programs, but also more significantly in what the gainful employment rule was really about, which was the quality of the program, so that the programs were of value to the employer who was hiring the people who graduated from those programs. And my view was that might be the mechanism. And I will say, I do not believe it's perfect. I just think it's a step in the right direction. And it would also move us closer to the federal direct loan program being more like an ISA, because there is a mechanism for the institution to be on the hook a bit.
Thank you, guys. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our panelists for a really informative discussion about this model.
Thank you.